Save me from the tracks. I will be your wife and do everything for you," the Comanche woman said to the rancher. It was a quiet morning near the edge of a small frontier town. The sun was just rising, casting a golden light over the wide fields and dusty paths that stretched for miles. Birds sang softly, and the wind rustled through the tall grass. The only sound that broke the calm was the distant clatter of a train, slowly approaching on the railroad tracks that cut through the open land. John Carter, a rancher in his early 30s, was walking near his cattle pens, inspecting the fences and checking the herd. His life was simple, focused on the land, his animals, and the quiet rhythms of rural living. He was known in the town for being steady and dependable, a man who rarely lost his temper and always tried to help those around him. Today, however, his attention was caught by something unusual, a small figure moving near the railroad tracks. At first, he thought it might be a child playing or a stray traveler, but as he got closer, he realized it was a young Comanche woman. She was wearing clothes that were worn and dusty, and her dark hair was tangled from the wind. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she looked frozen in place. What caught his attention most was that she was standing directly on the tracks, and a loud rumble in the distance made John's heart race. A train was coming, faster than he had realized. Without thinking, John ran toward her. His boots kicked up dust as he shouted, "Step back." "The train, it's coming." The woman seemed unable to move, her eyes fixed on the rails as if something invisible held her there. The noise of the train grew louder, the ground trembling beneath him. John's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He reached her in a few strides and grabbed her arm, pulling with all his strength. "Quick, get out of the way," he yelled. The woman's body was tense, and for a terrifying moment it seemed she might not be able to move. With a final effort, John dragged her to the side just as the train roared past, shaking the ground and throwing up dust and gravel. The wind from the speeding engine whipped their clothes and hair, but both of them were safe. John fell to his knees, gasping for breath, and the woman sank to the ground beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the fading clatter of the train and the wind through the grass. Finally, the woman looked up at him, her eyes wide and full of emotion. You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Then unexpectedly she added, "I will be your wife. I will do everything for you, just save me from the tracks." John froze. He had never heard words like these before, and he wasn't sure how to respond. The idea of marriage offered in such a desperate moment was strange and unsettling. He looked at her carefully. She was young, her face pale from fear, her body still shaking. It was clear she had been through something difficult. Yet her words were earnest, full of gratitude and desperation. "Wait," John said slowly, still catching his breath. "We can talk, but you don't have to." "I will do anything," she insisted, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "Anything you ask. Please, I don't want to die. Please save me." John looked around, trying to understand what had happened. The tracks stretched on in both directions, and there were no other people in sight. He realized she must have been traveling alone and somehow ended up in danger without knowing how to get away. He didn't know her story yet, but something in her eyes told him she was telling the truth. She was not lying. She truly believed she had nowhere else to turn. He helped her to her feet, and they walked a few steps away from the tracks. Dust clung to their clothes, and the wind had tangled their hair. John could see the fear slowly leaving her eyes, replaced by a strange mixture of hope and cautious relief. He asked her name, and she said softly, "Ahioka." It was a name he had never heard before, but it had a calm strength to it. As they stood there, John noticed the signs of her struggle. Her clothes were torn in places, her shoes worn through, and her hands were scratched from branches or rocks. It was clear that she had been traveling a long way, and probably alone. He felt a surge of respect for her courage, even as he worried about what she had endured. "Where were you going?" he asked gently. "How did you end up on the tracks?" Ahioka looked down at her feet, then back up at him. Her voice was quiet but steady. I was trying to reach a place where I could be safe, but I got lost. And then the train, I didn't know what to do. I was afraid. I didn't think anyone would come. John nodded, understanding a little. Life on the frontier was dangerous, especially for someone traveling alone. He had heard stories of people lost in the plains, of accidents on the tracks, and of encounters with wildlife or unfriendly travelers. He knew that without help, Ahioka could have faced real danger, or worse. "We should get you somewhere safe," John said. "You can't stay here. The train tracks aren't safe, and neither is the open land. Come with me to the ranch. You can rest and we'll figure things out from there." Ahioka hesitated, but then nodded. She trusted him, perhaps because he had saved her life just moments before. She followed him as he led the way back toward the small homestead where he lived. The ranch was modest, with a few wooden buildings, a stable, and fields that stretched out into the horizon. The air smelled of hay, horses, and earth warmed by the morning sun. Along the way, John asked more about her journey. Ahioka explained that she had been living on the edges of her tribe's land, but that conflicts and danger had forced her to travel farther than she expected. She had little food, no proper shoes, and no one to rely on. Her voice carried a mixture of sadness and determination. John listened, realizing that she was strong and resourceful, even if she had been caught in a desperate moment. By the time they reached the ranch, John could see that Ahioka's energy was fading. Her legs were tired, and her face was streaked with dirt and sweat. He offered her water and food, which she accepted gratefully. As she ate, John thought about the strange offer she had made. Marriage in exchange for saving her life was not something he could take lightly, but he also realized that her words came from a place of desperation, not manipulation. She was looking for safety, and he had the power to provide it. The day passed quietly, with John showing Ahioka around the ranch. He introduced her to the animals and explained the work that needed to be done to keep the land and livestock healthy. Ahioka listened carefully, absorbing every detail. She asked questions, learning quickly. Even in her fear, she showed intelligence and adaptability, and John found himself impressed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, John and Ahioka sat on the porch, looking out over the fields. There was a silence between them, but it was a comfortable one. Neither spoke of marriage again, but there was an unspoken understanding that this day had changed both their lives forever. John realized that the woman he had saved from the tracks was more than just a stranger in need. She was brave, determined, and capable of surviving in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. And Ahioka realized that the rancher who had pulled her from danger was someone she could trust, someone whose strength and kindness might offer her the safety she had been searching for. As night fell, John prepared a small bed for Ahioka in the guest room of the ranch. She thanked him quietly, her eyes reflecting gratitude and exhaustion. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she might be safe, that she might have a place to rest without fear. John watched her for a moment, thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought her to him. He did not yet know what the future would hold, whether their lives would remain intertwined or drift apart. But he understood one thing clearly. In that moment they had both been changed by a single act of courage and compassion. And sometimes, he thought, the smallest acts, saving a life, lending a hand, could alter the course of everything that followed. The stars began to appear in the night sky, and a quiet peace settled over the ranch. Inside, Ahioka finally closed her eyes, letting sleep wash over her. Outside, John sat on the porch a little longer, listening to the sounds of the night, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, and perhaps the beginning of a story neither of them could yet imagine. The morning after the terrifying incident on the railroad. Tracks was calm, but the air was thick with tension. John Carter woke early, as he always did, and stepped outside onto the porch. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows over the fields and the wooden buildings of the ranch. He could hear the soft noises of the animals beginning their day, horses pawing the ground, cows lowing in the distance, and chickens clucking in the yard. Yet, despite the familiar sounds, something felt different. Inside, Ahioka was awake as well. She had stayed in the guest room, but her movements could be heard through the floorboards. John could tell she was restless. The events of the previous day, the near-train accident, the fear, and the sudden offer she had made, were not something one could easily forget. Even in sleep, her mind had not found peace. John took a deep breath and decided it was time to talk with her, to understand more about her, and perhaps to understand himself. He walked inside quietly and found her sitting by the window, her hands folded on her lap, looking out at the fields. "Good morning," John said gently. "Did you sleep well?" Ahioka turned to him and nodded, though her eyes carried a hint of worry. "I slept," she said softly. "Thank you for letting me rest. I have not slept safely in a long time." John sat down beside her, careful not to make sudden movements that might startle her. "I can imagine. You've been through a lot, but you are safe here." Her eyes met his, and for a moment there was silence. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but determined. "I am grateful to you. You saved my life. I do not know how I can repay you." John shook his head slowly. "You do not have to repay me. I helped because it was the right thing to do. That is all." Ahioka's expression softened, but there was still a hint of tension. She had lived her life in uncertainty and danger, and trusting someone, even someone who had just saved her, was not easy. "It is not easy for me to trust," she admitted. "I have seen people I thought would protect me and then they left. But you did not leave. You helped me when I could do nothing for myself." John nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "I know it is not easy. But I cannot pretend that danger does not exist. You are safe here, at least for now." After a moment, Ahioka spoke again, this time with a question that John did not expect. "Why do you help strangers, John Carter? You do not know me, yet you risked your own life to save me." John considered this. He had never thought deeply about it, but he realized it was true. He had acted instinctively, without hesitation. "I guess I just believe in helping people when I can," he said finally. "It may not always be wise, but it is right. Some things are worth the risk." Ahioka nodded slowly, as if absorbing every word. She seemed to relax slightly, her shoulders no longer so tense. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that fascinated John. Despite her fear, she was not broken. She was determined to survive, to adapt, and perhaps even to find a place where she could belong. Breakfast was a quiet affair. John prepared simple food, bread, eggs, and fresh milk, while Ahioka helped by carrying plates and pouring water. She moved carefully, still aware of her surroundings, but her nervousness was fading as she began to settle into the routine of the ranch. John watched her and noticed how attentive she was, how quickly she learned the layout of the kitchen and the ways of the animals. It was clear that she was not only grateful but also eager to be helpful. After breakfast, John suggested they begin some work around the ranch. "The cattle need to be checked and the fences repaired," he said. "It will be good for both of us to move around, get some fresh air, and focus on the day." Ahioka agreed, and together they walked to the fields. The work was hard, physical, and tiring, but it had a rhythm that soothed the mind. John showed her how to check the fences, how to handle the tools safely, and how to move quietly around the cattle so they would not become startled. Ahioka listened intently and followed his instructions carefully. She stumbled a few times, but each time she corrected herself quickly. John began to admire her determination. As the morning passed, they talked more about their lives. John shared stories of his childhood on the ranch, of the long days of work, the changing seasons, and the responsibilities he had inherited from his parents. Ahioka listened with interest, occasionally asking questions about the land, the animals, and the routines of frontier life. When it was her turn, Ahioka spoke of her past. She explained that she had grown up with her family on the edge of Comanche territory. She spoke of the traditions, the ways of her people, and the close bond she had shared with her parents and siblings. But her story was also marked by loss. Her family had been separated by conflict, and she had been forced to live alone in dangerous conditions. Her voice wavered at times, but she never broke down completely. There was pride in her words, a pride that came from surviving despite the hardships. John listened quietly, not interrupting. He realized that the woman before him was more than just someone in need. She was strong, intelligent, and capable. Her life had been shaped by challenges that most people could not imagine, yet she had survived through courage and resilience. He felt a deep respect for her and a quiet sense of responsibility. She had trusted him once, and he could not let that trust be misplaced. By midday, the sun was high, and the work on the ranch had taken its toll. Both John and Ahioka were tired, but there was a sense of accomplishment in their efforts. They had repaired fences, fed the animals, and organized the supplies for the coming days. As they rested in the shade of a large oak tree, John realized that something was changing between them. The initial tension and fear were giving way to a cautious trust. Ahioka looked at John and smiled faintly. "I did not think I could work so hard today," she said. "But it feels good. I feel like I am learning, like I belong somewhere, even if only for a moment." John returned her smile, though it was thoughtful. "You are learning quickly. You are stronger than you realize." The afternoon brought new challenges. A sudden storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds covering the sky and wind picking up. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, turning the dirt paths to mud. John and Ahioka rushed to bring the animals under shelter, working together seamlessly. In the chaos, Ahioka showed courage and quick thinking, guiding the frightened cattle into the barn and securing the gates. John realized that she was not only brave but also resourceful. She could handle herself in difficult situations, even when danger threatened. After the storm passed, the ranch was quiet again. The animals were safe, and the fields were beginning to dry under the late afternoon sun. John and Ahioka stood together, surveying the land, and for a moment there was a shared understanding, an unspoken bond forming between them. They had faced danger, physical labor, and uncertainty, yet they had emerged stronger and more connected. As the evening approached, John led Ahioka back to the house. They cleaned up, and John prepared a simple dinner while Ahioka helped set the table. The day had been long and exhausting, but there was a sense of peace in the small routines of life on the ranch. Over dinner, they spoke of the future. Ahioka admitted that she had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and no home to call her own. John listened carefully, realizing that the offer she had made the day before was not something to be taken lightly. She was looking for safety, for belonging, and perhaps even for a place where she could rebuild her life. John spoke cautiously. "I cannot promise everything, Ahioka. Life on the frontier is not easy, but you are welcome to stay here at least for now. You can work, rest, and learn, and I will make sure you are safe." Ahioka nodded, her eyes reflecting both relief and gratitude. "I will do my best," she said. "I want to help and I want to learn. I will not be a burden." The night settled over the ranch, quiet and calm. Stars twinkled in the sky, and the wind carried the soft sounds of the countryside. John and Ahioka sat together on the porch, watching the fields and the animals resting for the night. There was a sense of shared understanding, a beginning of trust and respect that neither could yet fully define. John realized that this was only the start of a long journey. Ahioka's presence on the ranch would bring challenges, both from the outside world and within themselves. But he also understood that she was a remarkable person, capable of facing those challenges with courage and determination. And Ahioka realized that, For the first time in a long while, she had found someone she could trust, someone who had saved her life and offered her a chance to belong. The fireflies began to glow in the fields, tiny lights flickering in the darkness. Inside, the ranch was warm and safe, and both John and Ahioka felt a quiet sense of hope. The events of the previous day had changed their lives forever, and the bond that had begun on the railroad tracks was slowly growing stronger. In the distance, the sound of the wind through the grass was like a promise that, despite the dangers and uncertainties of the world, courage, kindness, and trust could build something lasting, something that might survive even the harshest storms. Days turned into weeks on the ranch, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. John Carter and Ahioka had grown accustomed to working together, sharing the labor and routines that kept the ranch running. The sun rose early, and by the time it touched the fields, both of them were already busy. John tended the animals, repaired fences, and checked on the crops, while Ahioka helped wherever she could, learning quickly and offering her own knowledge and skills. At first, John had been cautious around Ahioka. Her past, her sudden arrival, and the offer she had made out of desperation weighed heavily on his mind. He did not fully trust his own feelings, unsure whether his concern for her was simply a sense of duty or something deeper. But as he watched her work, her hands deftly tending to the animals, her eyes alert to every detail, he realized that she was unlike anyone he had ever met. She was brave, capable, and patient. Ahioka, for her part, was learning more than just the tasks of ranch life. She was learning to trust someone again. Life had taught her that the world was dangerous and that people could be cruel or indifferent, but John had saved her without asking for anything in return. He treated her with respect, gave her guidance, and allowed her to make her own decisions. This was new to her, and at first she was wary. Yet she began to feel a small spark of hope. One morning, John asked Ahioka to help him herd the cattle to the far fields. The herd had grown larger, and the fences needed checking after the recent rains. As they rode their horses across the wide fields, Ahioka began to notice the nuances of the work. The way the cattle responded to movement, the sound of hooves in the grass, and the way the wind carried the scent of the land. She was learning quickly, and John could see that she had a natural instinct for the work. "You have a good eye for the cattle," John said, glancing at her as she guided a stubborn steer back toward the herd. "I think you were made for this life." Ahioka smiled faintly, a quiet pride in her expression. "I have lived in the open land all my life," she said. "I know how to watch, how to listen, how to move carefully, but I did not know I would ever use these skills in a place like this." John nodded, impressed. "You've adapted quickly. Most people would struggle to keep up." The days were not without challenges. There were moments when the cattle ran too fast, when fences broke in the night, and when storms threatened to ruin the crops. Each obstacle tested their patience and skill, but it also brought them closer together. John began to rely on Ahioka's instincts, and she began to trust his experience. Together, they became a team, facing the difficulties of frontier life side by side. One afternoon, a stranger rode into the ranch. He was a traveler passing through, and he brought news from the town. "The neighbors are talking," he said casually as he tied his horse to the post. "They've noticed the woman on your ranch. Some people, they do not approve." John felt a flicker of frustration. He had anticipated suspicion from the townsfolk, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "Let them talk," he said firmly. "She is welcome here as long as she chooses to stay." Ahioka looked at John, gratitude and admiration in her eyes. "I will not be a trouble," she said softly. "I do not wish to cause problems. I only wish to live peacefully and help where I can." John smiled. "You're already helping more than you know. Don't worry about what others think. We have work to do, and that is more important than gossip." The stranger left, and John and Ahioka returned to their tasks. But the incident reminded John that life on the frontier, was not only about surviving nature, it was also about navigating the opinions and prejudices of others. Ahioka had come from a world very different from the town, and he knew she would face challenges simply because of who she was. He resolved silently that he would protect her as best he could. As weeks passed, the bond between John and Ahioka deepened. They shared small moments that became part of their daily life, teaching each other skills, sharing meals, laughing at mistakes, and sometimes sitting quietly together, watching the sun set over the fields. There was an unspoken understanding that had grown between them, a trust that went beyond words. One evening, a sudden panic swept across the ranch. A herd of cattle had broken through a weak fence and was stampeding toward the barn. John sprang into action, shouting instructions and running to intercept the animals. Ahioka, without hesitation, joined him. She moved with a calm determination, guiding the frightened cattle back toward the open fields, blocking their path with skillful movements and steady commands. John watched in amazement. In that moment, he realized that Ahioka was not only brave, but also strong and capable under pressure. She had saved him in a way he had not anticipated, by protecting the herd and preventing disaster. When the last cow was safely back inside the fence, he approached her, his face a mix of relief and admiration. "You were incredible," he said, breathing heavily from the exertion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ahioka shrugged lightly, a small smile on her face. "I am glad I could help. We must work together if we are to succeed. The land is not easy to tame, and the cattle, they do not wait for us." John laughed softly, feeling a sense of camaraderie and respect he had rarely experienced before. In that moment, he realized that their relationship had changed. It was no longer just about survival or gratitude, it was about partnership. They were learning to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to face life's challenges together. As the days went on, Ahioka continued to prove her worth in many ways. She learned to tend the garden, repair fences, and care for the animals. She also began to share stories of her people, teaching John about the traditions, customs, and ways of the Comanche. John listened with interest, gaining a new appreciation for a culture he had known little about. In turn, he shared his knowledge of the land, the animals, and the skills he had learned from his family. Their exchanges were respectful, honest, and enriching for both. The bond between them strengthened as they faced small adventures together. One day, while riding through the fields, they came across a family of deer trapped in a broken fence. Ahioka quickly assessed the situation and guided the animals to safety, showing patience and care. John watched her, silently acknowledging her compassion and intelligence. Another day, a sudden fire broke out in a patch of dry grass near the barn. John rushed to control it, but Ahioka was already there, using water from nearby barrels and blankets to smother the flames. Together, they managed to save the barn and the animals. Each challenge they faced reinforced their trust, and each success strengthened their growing friendship. But it was not just work and challenges that shaped their relationship. There were quiet, reflective moments too, nights spent watching the stars, evenings talking about hopes and fears, and mornings filled with shared laughter. Ahioka learned to relax, to enjoy the small joys of life on the ranch, while John learned to open his heart, to appreciate the courage and wisdom of someone very different from himself. Despite the growing trust and connection, there were still moments of tension. John struggled with his feelings for Ahioka, unsure whether he could fully accept her as a partner, given their very different backgrounds and the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Ahioka, too, wrestled with her emotions, aware of the complex nature of gratitude, trust, and affection. But both were patient, allowing time and shared experiences to shape their bond. By the end of the third month, John and Ahioka had become an inseparable team. The ranch was thriving under their care, the animals were well tended, and the fields were productive. But more importantly, they had built a foundation of trust, respect, and understanding. They had faced danger, worked hard, and learned to rely on each other. And in doing so, they had discovered a connection that was deeper than either had expected. One evening, after a long day of work, John and Ahioka sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. John turned to Ahioka and said quietly, "You have changed this place, and I think you have changed me too." Ahioka smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "And you have changed me," she said. "I felt lost when I came here, but now I feel like I belong somewhere, like I am not alone." John nodded, understanding the weight of her words. In saving her from the tracks, he had begun a journey neither of them could have predicted. Through challenges, danger, and shared work, they had found a partnership built on respect, courage, and growing affection. The bond that had begun in desperation was now strengthened by trust, skill, and mutual admiration. As night fell, the stars appeared once again in the clear sky, and the ranch was quiet. The animals rested, the fields were calm, and John and Ahioka felt a sense of peace. Their lives had been forever altered by a single moment of courage, and now, through patience, work, and understanding, they were discovering the deeper meaning of trust and connection. The third part of their journey ended with a sense of hope. They knew that life on the frontier would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that together, they could face whatever came their way. Each day, each task, each small victory brought them closer, weaving their lives into a shared story of survival, respect, and the beginning of a bond that could endure even the harshest trials. Months had passed since Ahioka had arrived at the ranch, and life had grown steadily busier. John Carter and Ahioka had settled into routines that were demanding, but also rewarding. The work on the ranch was never easy, and the seasons brought new challenges. Yet through all the hardships, they had learned to trust each other, to anticipate each other's needs, and to rely on one another. Spring had arrived, and with it came the delicate balance of new life and responsibility. The fields were green, cattle were giving birth, and the garden was producing the first tender shoots of vegetables and herbs. Ahioka had grown skilled with the animals, handling them with confidence and care. She moved among the herd with ease, speaking softly to the calves and guiding them gently. John watched her from a distance, feeling both admiration and a quiet sense of pride. "Your hands are gentle with them," he said one morning as they walked toward the barn. "They trust you." Most people take months to gain that kind of confidence from the animals. Ahioka smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I have always lived close to animals," she said. "They are honest. They do not judge. They respond to care and patience. I like that." "I feel at peace with them." John nodded, appreciating her perspective. He had always felt a deep connection to the land and the animals, but Ahioka's understanding brought a new dimension. It was as though she saw the life of the ranch not just as labor, but as a living, breathing part of the world. The bond between John and Ahioka continued to grow stronger, not only through work but through shared experiences and small adventures. One day, while inspecting a far-off fence line, they came across a fox trapped in a broken snare. Its leg was injured, and it struggled to escape. Ahioka knelt beside it, speaking softly, her hands steady and careful. "It is frightened," she said, "but it will be all right if we help." Together, they freed the fox and treated its injury as best they could. John watched her, amazed by her patience and compassion. Even in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, Ahioka's heart was gentle, and her courage unwavering. Their growing connection did not go unnoticed. The townsfolk still whispered about the Comanche woman living with the rancher, but over time, even the most skeptical began to see the value of Ahioka's presence. She was skilled, capable, and kind. She worked hard, showed respect, and treated the land and animals with care. Slowly, their distrust began to soften, though some still clung to old prejudices. One evening, as the sun began to set in a brilliant array of orange and gold, John and Ahioka sat on the porch, taking a rare moment of rest. The work of the day had been exhausting and the quiet was comforting. Ahioka turned to John, her expression serious yet calm. "John," she said softly, "I am grateful for everything you have done for me. You saved my life, gave me a place to stay, and taught me so much. I do not know how to thank you enough." John shook his head, a small smile on his face. "You do not need to thank me. You have shown me courage, skill, and loyalty. You are not just helping me, you are making this place better. That is thanks enough." Ahioka's eyes reflected both relief and quiet happiness. She had never imagined that someone would see her for more than her past or her mistakes. Here, on this quiet ranch, she felt valued and respected. It was a feeling she had long thought impossible. As the months passed, John and Ahioka faced new challenges that tested their skills, patience, and the strength of their bond. A summer drought arrived unexpectedly, threatening the crops and putting stress on the animals. The fields cracked in the heat, the riverbeds ran low, and the cattle grew restless. Together, John and Ahioka worked tirelessly, finding ways to conserve water, move the animals to fresher pastures, and protect the crops as best they could. Through these difficulties, they learned to rely on each other more fully. John's experience guided their actions, while Ahioka's intuition and quick thinking offered solutions he might not have considered. They worked side by side, communicating silently in moments of urgency, understanding each other without words. Their partnership was no longer just about survival. It had become a deep and meaningful connection, rooted in mutual respect and shared responsibility. One afternoon, a threat appeared from the human world. A group of rustlers had been seen in the area, and there was fear that the ranch's livestock could be stolen. John prepared to defend the herd, but Ahioka insisted on helping. "I am not afraid," she said firmly. "We will protect what is ours together." Her courage surprised him. Side by side, they patrolled the fields, keeping watch for any signs of danger. Hours passed, and the tension built, but Ahioka's calm presence steadied John's nerves. In the end, the rustlers never appeared, but the experience strengthened their trust and their ability to face the unknown together. As autumn approached, the ranch had weathered both natural and human challenges. The crops were harvested, the animals were healthy, and the land had been cared for through hard work and dedication. Yet it was not just the physical success of the ranch that mattered. It was the emotional growth of both John and Ahioka. They had learned patience, understanding, and the importance of partnership. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John noticed something in Ahioka's demeanor. She seemed reflective, her eyes distant as she watched the fading light. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. Ahioka turned to him, her face thoughtful. "I think about the life I had before and the life I have now. I never thought I would find a place where I belonged, but here, with you and the land, I feel whole. I feel like I have a purpose again." John felt a lump in his throat. He had grown to care deeply for her, though he still struggled to understand the full depth of his feelings. Her words, simple yet honest, touched him in ways he had not expected. "You do belong," he said quietly. "You have always belonged here as long as you choose to stay." The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and growing crops. They sat together in silence, the peace of the ranch surrounding them. For the first time, there was no fear, no tension, only trust, companionship, and a sense of shared purpose. Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to grow in quiet, meaningful ways. They shared stories from their pasts, laughed at small mistakes, and celebrated successes, no matter how minor. Ahioka taught John about the ways of her people, how to move quietly through the land, how to understand the signs of nature, and how to respect all living creatures. John shared his knowledge as well, teaching her the skills needed to manage the ranch effectively. Through it all, they faced the world together. Natural disasters, unpredictable weather, and the opinions of neighbors no longer seemed overwhelming because they had each other. Each challenge was an opportunity to strengthen their bond and prove their resilience. One day, as winter approached, John realized how much Ahioka had changed the ranch and his life. Her presence had brought not just labor and skill, but also warmth, wisdom, and hope. He looked at her and felt gratitude beyond words, not just for her help, but for her courage, her spirit, and the way she had become part of the land and life he loved so deeply. Ahioka, too, reflected on the changes in her life. She had come to the ranch frightened and alone, seeking only safety. But over time she had found something far greater, a home, a partner, and a sense of belonging she had never known. She realized that her life was no longer defined by fear or desperation, but by courage, trust, and the meaningful bonds she had formed. The quiet moments of the ranch, the sunsets, the shared meals, the laughter, and the work done side by side, had created something extraordinary. What had begun as a moment of desperation on the railroad tracks had grown into a deep and enduring connection. They had learned from each other, grown together, and faced life's challenges with courage and respect. As the stars appeared in the winter sky, John and Ahioka stood together on the porch, looking out over the fields. The animals rested, the wind whispered through the trees, and the land seemed calm and eternal. John felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Ahioka turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I am grateful for this life," she said softly. "I am grateful for you." John took a deep breath, understanding the weight of her words. "And I am grateful for you," he replied. "For your courage, your strength, and your presence. We are stronger together than we ever could be alone." That night, as they went inside, the warmth of the home contrasted with the cold winter outside. They had endured so much together, learned to trust, and built a bond that was unshakable. The challenges of the frontier were many, but they had faced them with patience, skill, and a shared commitment to each other. Part 4 of their story ended not with a dramatic event, but with the quiet understanding that trust, respect, and partnership had become the foundation of their lives. The bond that had begun in desperation was now built on strength, loyalty, and shared experience. And as winter settled over the land, John and Ahioka knew that the future, though uncertain, would be faced together. With courage, determination, and hope, years had passed since Ahioka had first arrived at the ranch. What had begun as a desperate moment on the railroad tracks had grown into a life of courage, trust, and partnership. The ranch had changed with them. The fields were well tended, the animals healthy, and the land productive. But more than that, John and Ahioka had grown together, learning from each other, supporting each other, and finding in their shared life a bond deeper than either could have imagined. The seasons continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Spring brought fresh growth, summer brought long days of hard work, autumn brought harvest, and winter brought quiet reflection. Through it all, they had faced storms, droughts, and dangers from both nature and humans. Each challenge had tested them, but together they had found ways to overcome every obstacle. The trials had strengthened their connection and deepened their understanding of each other. Ahioka had become an integral part of the ranch. Her knowledge of the land, the animals, and the skills she had learned from her own people had improved every aspect of their work. She tended the animals with care, guided the crops with wisdom, and even helped John make decisions about how to protect and grow the ranch. John had grown to rely on her insight, realizing that she had become his equal in skill, courage, and judgment. But their bond was not only built on work. They shared small moments of everyday life that brought joy, laughter, and warmth. They celebrated simple victories, like a successful harvest or the safe delivery of a calf. They shared stories of the past, recounting memories that had shaped them and listening carefully to each other's experiences. Through it all, their respect and admiration for each other continued to grow. One spring morning, as the sun rose over the fields, John and Ahioka were walking along the edge of the pasture. The grass was damp with dew, and the air was filled with the sound of birds and the distant lowing of cattle. They paused to watch a pair of fawns play near the tree line. John turned to Ahioka and said quietly, "Do you remember the day you first arrived? On the railroad tracks?" Ahioka nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "I remember," she said softly. "I thought I would not survive the day, and now look at us. We have built something together, something I never thought possible." John smiled, feeling the weight of her words. "We have. You have changed this place, and you have changed me too. I could not imagine life without you now." Ahioka's eyes reflected the same quiet gratitude and warmth that had grown between them over the years. She reached for his hand and he held it gently, feeling the strength of their connection. "I am glad we found each other," she said. "Even in the most desperate moment, we were able to create something lasting." The years continued and their partnership flourished. Together they had raised a family, teaching their children the values of courage, hard work, and respect for the land. The ranch had grown prosperous, not through luck, but through patience, skill, and the strength of their combined efforts. The children learned not only the practical skills of ranch life, but also the lessons of trust, kindness, and cooperation that John and Ahioka embodied every day. But life on the frontier was never without challenges. One summer, a severe drought threatened the ranch. The riverbeds ran dry, crops wilted, and the cattle grew restless. John and Ahioka worked tirelessly, digging new water channels, rationing supplies, and moving the animals to areas where food and water were still available. The work was exhausting, but they faced it together, supporting one another through every difficulty. Their children helped as well, learning firsthand the value of perseverance and teamwork. In another instance, a fire broke out near the edge of the property. Flames spread quickly through the dry grass, and the smoke filled the sky. John and Ahioka acted immediately, guiding the animals to safety and fighting the fire with water and blankets. Their courage and quick thinking prevented a disaster, and the ranch survived unscathed. These experiences reminded them that life was fragile, but that courage, skill, and cooperation could overcome even the greatest threats. Despite the hardships, there were moments of joy and beauty. John and Ahioka often spent evenings sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. The stars appeared one by one in the clear night sky, and the quiet sounds of the ranch, the rustle of the wind through the trees, the lowing of cattle, and the soft calls of distant birds created a peaceful harmony. In those moments, they reflected on the life they had built, the challenges they had overcome, and the bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. Their story became known in the surrounding town, though often quietly. People spoke of the rancher and the Comanche woman who had worked together to build a life of trust, respect, and courage. Some admired their dedication and the way they had faced life's challenges, while others still held onto old prejudices. But John and Ahioka did not seek approval. They focused on the life they had created, on the family they had raised, and on the legacy they were leaving on the land they loved. One autumn day, John and Ahioka took a walk to the edge of the river that ran near their property. The trees were painted in shades of gold, red, and orange, and the air carried the crisp scent of approaching winter. They paused to watch the water flow, smooth and steady, reflecting the changing sky above. "I sometimes think about that day on the tracks," Ahioka said quietly. "If you had not been there, I would not be here. I would not have found this life. I would not have found you." John squeezed her hand, understanding the depth of her words. "And I am grateful that you trusted me. That moment changed both of our lives." It was a single act, but it led to everything we have now. Family, home, trust, all of it began there. Ahioka smiled, leaning slightly against him. It is strange to think that life can change in a single moment. But that moment can become a lifetime if you are willing to face it with courage and heart. The years continued, and John and Ahioka grew older together. They faced new challenges as the children grew, the land required more care, and the world around them changed. Yet the principles they had lived by, courage, trust, respect, and cooperation, remained constant. They continued to work together to teach their children and to nurture the ranch as both a home and a legacy. As winter approached one particularly quiet year, John and Ahioka sat together by the fireplace, watching the flames flicker and the shadows dance on the walls. The ranch was silent, the animals resting, and the snow beginning to fall outside. They reflected on their lives, the journey that had begun with a desperate plea on the railroad tracks and the life they had built together. "I am proud of what we have done," John said softly. "Not just the ranch, but everything. The family, the life, the trust we have built. None of it would be the same without you." Ahioka reached for his hand, her fingers intertwined with his. "And I am proud too. I have found safety, purpose, and love. I have learned so much from you. You have been my strength, my partner, and my family. I could not ask for more." In that quiet moment, they realized the depth of what they had built together. The bond that had begun in fear and desperation had grown into a partnership of mutual respect, courage, and unwavering trust. They had faced life's dangers, challenges, and uncertainties, and they had done so side by side. The story that had begun with a single act of bravery had become a lifetime of devotion, understanding, and love. Years later, when the children had grown and some had started families of their own, the ranch remained a testament to the life John and Ahioka had built. The animals thrived, the fields flourished, and the land was cared for with the same dedication that had marked every year of their lives. Their story became a quiet legend, shared in whispers and remembered as an example of courage, resilience, and the power of trust. Ahioka often thought back to the day on the railroad tracks. She remembered the fear, the desperation, and the sudden hope that had come with John's help. But she also remembered how that single moment had grown into a lifetime of growth, learning, and love. It reminded her that life was unpredictable, that courage could change everything, and that a single act of compassion could lead to something extraordinary. John, too, remembered that day often. He realized that in saving Ahioka, he had not only changed her life, but his own as well. She had brought strength, insight, and love into his world, enriching his life in ways he had never imagined. Together, they had faced danger, built a family, nurtured the land, and created a legacy that would continue for generations. The ranch remained a symbol of what could be achieved through partnership, respect, and courage. And John and Ahioka, now older but still devoted to each other and the life they had created, knew that the bond they had formed would endure long after their time. The desperate plea on the railroad tracks had become a story of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of human connection. As the sun set one final time in the narrative of this chapter of their lives, John and Ahioka stood together, watching the sky painted with shades of gold and purple. They held hands, feeling the warmth of their shared journey, and silently acknowledged the life they had built. It had begun with a moment of fear, but it had grown into a lifetime of trust, partnership, and love, a story that would live on in the land, in their children, and in the hearts of all who knew them. And so, their story ended not with drama, but with the quiet beauty of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would continue to inspire courage, kindness, and trust for generations to come.